Purple sensation. Purple sensation is one that I'd say you do lose the odd bulb, but if you leave them to seed, the seedling ones you never seem to lose. And I know it takes 5 years from seed to a flowering bulb, but it's worth it because, I mean, what's the worst you can do? Just dig them up and move them or throw them away. But the stale seeded purple sensations are better than the purple sensation you plant to start with. If you don't want an allium to seed anywhere, then go for Globemaster, which is an excellent allium. It's been around a long time now. It's one you can leave in the ground. You do need to lift it every 3 to 5 years because it will get congested, and that one, the head really does get a lot smaller if you don't separate the bulbs, but it's sterile, so it doesn't seed around.
That's what I was sort of alluding to, I suppose, was some bulbs get weaker year on year, but with the alliums, that's not really the case because they're either doing what Schubertii does, which is flowering to death, or they need dividing. So a bit like daffodils, I guess. Do they ever come up blind if they get congested?
I've never left them that long. They usually, if they're coming up blind, it usually means they've got a virus.
Oh, that's interesting. Do you need to feed them?
When I plant them, I usually give them a little bit of fish and bone in the hole before I plant it. Mm-hmm. Other than that, no, I don't feed them much at all.
And can you grow them in pots? I know you said some aren't suited, but are there any that do?
Some of the smaller, more specialist ones I grow in pots, partially so I don't lose them in the soil, partially because it means that as soon as they finish flowering or as they are flowering, I can dry them off by putting them straight in the greenhouse, and they can finish their flowering in the greenhouse and they won't get any more moisture on them, any rain. Mm-hmm. So I can keep them going. But the majority of them do prefer being in the ground.
And in terms of sunshine or shade?
Most of them prefer full sun. A lot will cope with semi-shade. So Allium nigrum is a very good one that can be left in the ground and is happy in semi-shade and even quite a lot of moisture. Purple Sensation doesn't mind semi-shade. Ambassador doesn't mind semi-shade. Gladiator. A lot of them will cope with semi-shade as long as they get some sun during the day.
And if you were talking about a particularly difficult spot, say, that was dry and relatively shady, is there anything that might cope with that? Or is that asking too much?
There is one that flowers in March. Although it might be dry shade, you've had the moisture from the winter, called Allium paradoxum variety normale. Don't ever buy paradoxum. It is pernicious weed, but it will seed everywhere and has hardly any flowers on it. Mm-hmm. But this particular one is well behaved. Comes up, it's only about 20 to 30 centimetres high with a little white flower, and that will cope with the dryness. So if you're growing under, say, deciduous shrubs, it will have done its thing, and then by the time it's finished flowering, the shrubs have got their leaves and it's died down, and it will just sit there under the soil ready for the following year.
In terms of flowers, how long do the flowers last? Does that vary from type to type?
It varies more with the weather. So if it's particularly wet or particularly hot and dry, they don't last quite as long, but usually 4 to 6 weeks.
And they make good cut flowers too, don't they?
Yes, some are better than others. Also, don't forget some of them that are very, very oniony, smelly.
Very true. The other thing that I think a lot of people find with the alliums is that the flowers and the flower stalks look lovely and the leaves look tatty. Can you take those leaves off?
Yes, I quite often trim them down. Or the other way, if you haven't got the time, because I've got a lot, if you plant round them with things like geraniums, other perennial plants, then you don't see them. That's the best thing to do.
And they don't mind pushing their way up through a small canopy of other perennial plants?
No, they don't mind at all. With the bigger ones, some of the smaller ones, the late summer flowers don't like having, say, like a geranium flopping on top of them. But the sort of Purple Sensations or Mount Everest, no, they don't mind.
And when they finish flowering, should I cut the spent seed flower heads back?
If you leave them on, then you may have lots of seedlings, which if you're a very neat and tidy gardener and don't like seeing all the seedlings, then cut them off. If you like to see sort of autumn with the seed heads on, then leave them on. Mm-hmm. You may find if it's very windy, something like Christophia, the head does blow off, and then it looks like you've got tumbleweed running all around the garden.
Do pollinators like them, or does the oniony smell put those off too?
Bees love alliums. I always say to people, if they're coming up to my allotment to see my collection when they're all flowering, one of the things I say is, are you frightened of bees? Because if you are, then you can't come up there, because you'll find the bees will be hitting you, literally bouncing off your body to try and get to the alliums, because they're just bonkers about them. And Allium siculum, what used to be called Nectroscordon, bumblebees are bonkers for them. And when we were in Holland, I was standing in the sort of firing line of Allium siculum, and the bumblebees were literally bombarding me, sort of trying to push me out the way to get to these flowers. Some of them hoverflies like. So there's one, the cesium and the litvinovii, which are quite tricky to grow. But again, when we were out in Holland, because they had grown them in such large quantities, you could see that the only thing that went to these were the hoverflies. And then you've got the summer flowers, such as senescens, lusitanica, angulosum. They're all loved by bees and by butterflies.
So they would be a good one to plant if you had a wildlife garden.
Yes.
So we've mentioned that they come up well through other perennials. Is there anything else that they kind of work well with, or are there any perennials that you think they look particularly lovely next to?
I think they go with anything.
Yeah.
But I'm biased. I think they go in most schemes. I've seen them in some very modern schemes, and then also in traditional cottage garden.
Yeah, I agree. They're one of those plants that works well in both. Yeah, they're very versatile. Do they suffer from any pests or diseases?
Yes, some slugs and snails will munch some of the leaves. They're not too much of a problem, but you have got the allium aphid, which can be devastating if you get enough of them. There's also I think it's called the allium leaf miner, which causes a problem with onions, leeks, garlic, and then also the alliums, but you don't see it that often. And some of them are also prone to rust. I had rust this year, or I think it was to do with the heat. They got very stressed. Allium fistulosum, which is mainly grown as an edible, but I do grow it as an ornamental as well.
And I'm always trying to find natural solutions to any pests and diseases. Is there anything that you can recommend that might work if you did have an outbreak of, say, the rust or aphids?
I'm trying planting oregano with it. It's had some success. This summer was particularly difficult because of the heat. I have read that it's supposed to help, but other than that, no, I haven't found anything that can help.
So companion planting, kind of theoretically,
yes.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, I'll be interested to find out how you get on with that. And my last question is, what is your favourite and why? I know it's probably a really impossible question to answer, but...
Do I have to pick one?
No, you can have more than one. Two.
Could I have three?
Yeah, go on then. One from each group.
So Allium Early Emperor, which is an early one, and it comes from Iran, but from an area of Iran which the soil conditions and the weather is very similar to here. So it's the first of the big flashy ones to flower. So it's April and it's stunning. 2 or 3 years it's bolt up, it's gorgeous. And if you look at it closely, it's bicoloured. So it's the tepals are purple and the anther it looks white from the distance, but actually pale pink. So I love that one. Allium Christophii, it's a real toughie, very big, blousy, gorgeous, and quite quirky. I have found that it moves around in the soil, the actual bulb itself. So I started out, when I first had my collection, I had them in rows, and I used a line to plant my row of 10. And I try and do straight lines. And I came back and I looked at these alliums, and they'd moved themselves all over the place. And I thought, well, that's not possible. And then later in the season, I found it moves itself up and down as well. So it pushes itself out of the soil. And I thought, well, that can't be right. I went to a couple of gardens that we'd planted up, some Christophii, and I found them sitting on the surface. And I thought, have I had a moment and I've forgotten to plant these ones? So I replanted them and then went back a couple of weeks later, and they pushed themselves back up. And they seem to come up at certain times and then drop down. And I think it's maybe for the heat. So they come up, get a bit of heat, and then when they've had enough, they literally drop down 10 centimetres. in the soil. Because then I thought, what's happened? The squirrel run off with it. Dug down, and there it was. It literally dropped itself down. So I like that one because it's pretty, but it's also got some personality.
That's a really good point. If you do see your allium bulbs uncovered, then don't be tempted to replant them.
I wouldn't bother because it will push itself back up.
That's amazing.
And then, of course, Allium eros, it's different and it is beautiful. Definitely worth growing.
Thank you, Jackie, for your insight into alliums. I think a lot of people will be surprised to find out just how tricky they are. If you don't want to get caught out planting alliums that don't last or need a lot of work, I'll put a list of those Jackie recommended in the show notes, but it might be worth keeping an eye on her work in the future, just saying. So thank you for listening, and I will catch you next Tuesday.
For more information, visit the Roots and All website at rootsandall.co.uk. To download more episodes, visit iTunes, your favourite podcast provider, or get them direct from our website.